So, welcome to the introduction to the Smoothie Feast. And some people thought it was a smoothie fast. And I've never liked the idea of fasting or like restricting your nourishment. I mean, there is a place for fasting, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I don't. From a young age, I've always tried to have a better figure, and this whole restricting your calorie intake it was at the time, and then just restrict your food, just eat a little bit, never appealed to me because it just made me tired and yeah, lame. I call that state, where your mind is not functioning fully and your body is like just wants to sit down. And so, therefore, when I do a smoothie event, it is hyper nourishment. It is actually enhancing your body's reproductive abilities. And that's not making babies, that's reproduction in terms of cell tissue. As you may know, all of life on this planet, I don't know about other planets, on this planet reproduces itself all the time. Cell tissue renews itself constantly. And as soon as that stops or is impeded upon or doesn't get enough fuel to continue, um, we get very tired and sick. So, nourishing and hyper nourishing the body so that it can have this extra boost of cell production, and of course, also of discarding the cell tissue, the old. Now, it's not just skin that we're shedding, right? We're shedding in our excrement and urine all the other dead cell tissue that we no longer need, that has expired, right? Because everything in life is cyclical and cyclical and cyclical and cyclical. So, therefore, I promote hypernourishment, meaning that we pack so much nutrition into, if possible, a full blender of sweet and a full blender of savory smoothie. And it's all fresh, organic produce, fruits, and vegetables. And for a few years now, I have also taken up what my dear colleague, Dr. Brooke Goldner, promotes, because it does make a lot of sense. And I had read about it before, decades ago, a high amount of cruciferous elements in what we add from the leafy vegetable side. And now it doesn't have to actually all be leaves. For example, cauliflower is a cruciferous vegetable that has a lot of the same properties that we want from the cruciferous kingdom. Now, the cruciferous vegetables tend to, like cabbages and kale, and there's all kind of other, look it up, other, for example, radish greens are very high in nutrients. And of course, dandelion leaves, when you get them in the grocery store. But you can find what works for you in the cruciferous kingdom and add that to both your sweet and your savory smoothies, so that you get that bombardment of nutrients in a form that we can actually absorb. If you had to sit down and eat a 2-pound bowl of leafy salad, that would be very long to chew, and I think your jaw would hurt. So, therefore, when we smash the tissue of the food, then the absorption is faster. Yes, we can, if we believe in, we need to mix it with saliva first. But the many studies that have been done in the meantime show very clearly that even if you just swallow, here's a big smoothie that I made this morning. I'll tell you in a minute what's in it. Even if you just swallow directly, your stomach is able to absorb more of those nutrients because they're broken down and the fiber is in there, which is another important part. So I wanted to talk briefly about why smoothies versus juice versus fasting. Um, Now, the first to invent in the recent times, of course, this healing modality goes millennia back, and people have known that when you give the body just the juices of plants, you get a particular fast effect of self-healing. But a juice leaves a lot of the fiber out, of course. And while the nutrients in the juice go directly into the bloodstream, and that's all very good, the other side of it is that you have less roughage. And roughage is what cleans out the gook that accumulates on the sides of your intestines. So that, and the people who do longer juice fasts often then do colonics and pull out these long, gooey, rubbery, almost like tubes or pieces of tubes that come out because our regular, conventional, should I say, American diet, and many diets, of course, now in the world, produce this gooey stuff that we cannot discard on our own unless we put that extra roughage that fresh vegetables and fruit provide. And that roughage, I call it, it sweeps out the inside or brushes out the insides of your intestines so that that rubbery lining does not have to be pulled out with colonics, but comes out by itself in pieces, not in a big piece. Like, look it up, it's pretty gross. It comes out in these colonics. So we can get the benefit of the roughage that is in the fiber that is not completely juicified, so to speak, in our smoothies, so that there's that roughage and still there, and we have this thick consistency. See that provides us with both the intensive vitamins, the minerals, and the roughage that we need to get that cleansing effect. And then there's also something else in my smoothies. There's often a little bit of extra omega-3, which is something that we need for the new cell tissue building. And I learned that many, many years ago, that the wall of our cells requires, the membrane, it is often called, requires omega-3s. So, and those, of course, should be in as pure a state as possible, and they go rancid very quickly. So while I, of course, also make put flax in my dehydrated products, it's not as pure as when you put flax or chia seeds, or if you walnuts for that matter, also very high in omega-3s, into a smoothie. And because they're in the aqueous mixture, in the watery mixture, they cannot, and they're held by the fiber, they cannot float to the surface, which fats would otherwise do, right? And get any kind of level of oxidation that they would have if you, for example, bought flaxseed oil. So that's one of the reasons why I like smoothies over juice. And the last reason is that it gets very expensive buying 5 pounds, 10 pounds of fruits and vegetables if you juice them, because you throw away so much of the fiber and the rough, right? Okay. Yeah, so then we have comparing that. Welcome, Ed. We have that comparing to a fast. Now, I believe fasts can be very, very healing. However, because my personal predicament is that my body, I was born kind of with a little hole in my heart and a very low blood pressure generally. So, for low blood pressure people, it is particularly hard to fast. We need fuel all the time. Um, and I also, if we want to do a longer fast, more than 24 hours, there should be some supervision, and you should not have to go to work and do your regular um, business activities when you do a total water fast, right? Or some people even do a dry fast, which I know very little about. Water fast, I do know that people have had phenomenal results. And again, a little bit to you, Hillary, the body type does make a difference here, because especially your blood pressure baseline. This is not that my blood pressure became low at some point. I was born that way. I always wear lipstick because you would see my purple lips otherwise, and it sort of indicates that there's something wrong with me. Of course, I live very happily and still go running and all of that because of the lifestyle I've developed for myself and for so many others. I think we're in the thousands now. So one more thing to be said for, of course, either smoothie or juice fast, the ingredients really should be organic. Why? Because you're just adding so many problems when they're not, especially in this country. We now have a high amount of our vegetables, even when they're not GMO, sprayed with glyphosate, and all the efforts to ban that stuff have failed so far. So we'll see if we get any further in the near future with getting those incredibly destructive chemicals. And of course, it's not just the glyphosate, it's also all the artificial fertilizers and then the preservatives that are also sprayed, by the way, on our fruits and vegetables when they're not organic. Once they're in the packaging, that then allows them to be shipped for miles and miles and lay around for weeks in stores, right? That's why organic fruits and vegetables go bad fast, because that's the natural cycle. They expire unless they're heavily chemically treated. All right, so that just to make that again clear, I know most of you know that. That's why organic is so important. And you will have the people, oh, there's not really much difference. They found all kinds of stuff on the organic, and yes, but it's a lot better than the other stuff. So sometimes you just have to do as best you can, as opposed to perfect. There's no perfect, of course, on planet Earth. Everything is transitory. So, what are the results of just smoothies, and how can we do this smoothie feast? Let me start with that. We can either do the smoothie feast as a purely smoothies, and then after the third day, we add salads, but all raw, and a couple of other things. We can do it as a purely raw experience, or we can just say we start every day with a half gallon of smoothies. We can't drink all of it at the same time, but we start every day with a load of smoothies and then add whatever else we feel like eating of our regular diet. And many people will realize that, oh my God, I'm so full from this amount of smoothie. I don't really feel like eating much else. Maybe a couple of bananas, or maybe some, just throwing something out there, some steamed potatoes or rice and beans or whatever you else you want to eat. But you have already that load of smoothies in your body. You have that hypernourishment that goes into your bloodstream, ready to absorb and ready to fix a lot of things, even if you then add something that is not raw or not plant-based. So, better to do something than to do nothing. Um, and that's how I would run the Smoothie Feast for almost anybody who wants to have an experience. Of course, the results will be phenomenally stronger if you leave out everything else, but it's fine. Do it for yourself the way you can, the best you can. So, what's in fruits and vegetables? Do we really get a full spectrum nourishment? Um, aren't we missing? I still get that, even though we've had so much about it. I still get that. How about the protein? How can I get my protein? Well, as my dear friend Dr. Milton Mills always says, all proteins are made by plants. That's where the elephant gets the protein. That's where the bull gets the protein. That's where the crocodile gets the protein. Because even the lion gets the protein from plants just secondhand. Because the lion typically would eat herbivores that have a lot of plant matter, of course, not just in their stomach, which predators typically eat the contents of, but also in their entire tissue because it's built with plant fuel. So we have the full spectrum of nutrients, of course, to varying degrees in varying plants. That's why I also include smoothies that I call full meal smoothies that may include ground down raw millet. The millet becomes a fine flour and it thickens, obviously, the smoothie. And you can eat it as almost like a pudding or add more water and drink it. Um, Sometimes I add some raw oats. Yes, some people will say they're not 100% raw, but they bring a broad spectrum of B vitamins. The millet brings something that is not in many plants to a significant amount, and that's selenium. Um, and some people use some buckwheat. Again, in the seeds often contain a better B vitamin spectrum, so that when we add some of that, flax seeds to chia seeds to all nuts and seeds, which are, of course, the concentrated part of the plant that will produce an entire new plant and therefore contain qualities that the other plant does not. Of course, they're missing the chlorophyll, they're missing the photonic energy that you have in all leafy and fruity plant items that we can eat. Ask me if you have any questions regarding what I just said, but we want to have this full spectrum of all the nutrients we need even in our smoothie feast. So it's never just, throw in some bananas and strawberries and a little whatever almond milk from the store, which contains hardly any almonds at all. And and then we call that a smoothie, or we put some powder in with water and call that a smoothie. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about real fruits and vegetables and a thick consistency that feels like you are actually, when you have to slurp it. Hear that? Of course, you can use a big straw if you'd like that better. And you have this feeling that it's massive, right? It's dense, delicious, by the way, nutrition. Let me quickly tell you what's in this particular smoothie. This would be a sweet smoothie, and then I would have a savory smoothie on the side as well. I don't have one today, but I'll have one tonight for the introduction tonight. In this smoothie, I have, let me think. And again, the variations are endless. It depends on what you can get. I have red cabbage for cruciferous and some green cabbage also for cruciferous. Red grapes, um, cranberries, very high density of, this is the season, of course, where we can get fresh cranberries, right? But if you can get some frozen, that's pretty good too. Then we have pear, and I feel like there was something else in there. And then we have frozen strawberries and frozen blueberries. Now, I get them from a store, Aldi's, where they have very ripe frozen strawberries and blueberries, and they're at very good pricing, obviously. I think what they do is they find the berries that are already too ripe to be sold in stores, so they put them into their frozen baggies, and they're always really ripe and deliciously sweet. You open the frozen bag and you get this whiff of, oh my God, strawberries, or whiff of, oh my God, blueberries, the real smell, which you don't get, by the way, from our non-organic conventional berries, right? You open the bag and it smells like chemicals to me. It doesn't smell like the fruit at all. So, and then on top, a couple of spoons of flax seeds. And I think that's it. That was quite a lot. I should have written it down. But it doesn't matter if you don't have strawberries. Raspberries are great. All berries are great. But in my recipes, which if you join the Smoothie Feast, you will, of course, get a whole list of different recipes that my clients have found to be very delicious. There's Blueberry Heaven, which is heavily relying on blueberries, obviously, right? There's the full meal smoothie. There's millet medley. There's, all kinds of different variations where an element is emphasized, because we want to have variation as well. But some people don't want variation. So I have one client who said, no, I love the blueberry smoothie. I'm just going to have that every day. And he still 2 years later has blueberry heaven. That's okay too, because all plants contain the full spectrum of nutrients, just not at the same levels, right? And still it works. So, and if in where you are, you have peaches and pineapples, that's beautiful too. Mangoes were great. Now they're up here in the north, they're out of season and more expensive. Mangoes, of course, are great. If you get organic mangoes, use the peel as well. It intensifies the mango flavor and has a huge bunch of additional nutrients that are not even in the flesh of the mango. So put your fruits in there as you like them. Figure out which mixture really works for you, or multiple mixtures, and that's the fruity smoothie. I'm going to give you the spectrum of the green smoothie tonight. I'm doing the second introduction at 7 p.m. And we'll talk about the savory smoothie and why I think it's important to have a savory smoothie. Let me just give you a little couple of tidbits. My savory smoothies include garlic and ginger, which are two very important cleansing food items, worldwide used, which I found so interesting. They're just some things that everybody in any culture you go to knows are good healing plants. And garlic and ginger are certainly at the center of that, and cayenne, or the hot peppers, jalapenos, etc. So, all right, now what can you expect if you did what can you expect in terms of results? What have people experienced? again, there's a wide variation how depending on how intensified you do it. With the full raw 7-day smoothie, then adding salads and other raw foods, um, you can have a complete reversal of diabetes, for example. Yes, literally in 7 days. It has been done thousands of times. For that, I recommend you watch Simply Raw, Reversing Diabetes in 30 Days. Of course, you have to continue then. But yeah, the values are down for almost everybody in that movie, for everybody in 7, 8 days. So, um, and many other things. I mean, I have one client who 4 days into his smoothie feast just said, I'm a new person, I'm a new man. So, and then of course you continue to cleanse and establish and build for a few more days. So the results can be phenomenal because of all of what I described above, including cancer reversal and shrinking tumors and so forth. It has all been experienced, and yeah, we can't talk about that very much on any kind of platform, unfortunately. But yeah, there's lots of literature about that too. Nathan Crane has written about it. Um, Jonathan Otto has documentary series about it, and many, many others. And of course, the Hippocrates Wellness Institute used to be Hippocrates Health Institute. Now it's Hippocrates Wellness. Um, has done it now for 65 years. And, the results are always the same, even though our environment and our bombardment with chemicals gets worse in these last 60 years, has gotten worse in these last 60 years. Okay, then we get to a few days into the smoothies, and we have the addition of salads, the same leafy greens that you may have put into your savory smoothie, then can also be added, and other things. For example, you can make yourself a nut butter and add that, making a thick dressing. I have wonderful dressing recipes for that, so that you get more of a feeling that you also get more fat. Fat, of course, we haven't discussed, is very, very important for the human brain. But which fats? Unfortunately, all animal fats are destructive to the brain, but all plant fats are also not quite equal. So we have the omega-6s and the omega-3s, and we typically get more omega-6s because we use these refined plant-based oils, right? Seed oils. Now, recently there's been a lot of talk about seed oils and how bad they are. But of course, that is conventionally produced oil, refined, heated. It's literally rancid, but we don't smell it because then all kinds of chemicals are added to make them smell better. So the fat that we really need to consume is, again, the omega-3 rich fats that are in nuts and seeds and in all plants again, but mostly in nuts and seeds. I eat a lot of nuts and seeds. Some raw food friends of mine eat very little nuts and seeds because they feel better when they just eat fruit and greens. Some of my friends eat very little fruit because they feel that there's too much fruit sugar in fruit. And again, there's that same argument. The brain lives on sugar and builds fat for its cell tissue. needs fat for its cell tissue and lives on those two elements in our nutrition. So sugars are also very important to me and people like Dr. Doug Graham and others. We do very well with a lot of fruit. But again, there's a variety of approaches. I think they're all good when people live happily and healthily with those food choices. If you don't know, I'm 71. I ran my first marathon at 64 and ran a couple more. I still run, and I don't have any aches or pains any day. I mean, of course, if I injure my foot, I will feel it. It will hurt. but there are no backaches, headaches, joint aches, the stuff that people my age complain about all the time. I just don't have them. I have none of those issues. Doesn't mean that my body is perfect. Like I told you in the beginning, I was born with all kinds of defects, if you will. We all have certain amounts of defects. So the defects are often not reversible. I can't fix that little hole in my heart. I can't fix the fact that I have poor tissue, period, and other things, bad teeth, and of course I wasn't eating well when I was a child and growing up, but that's not the topic for just now. I wanted to give you a quick description of how smoothies became a thing in the 1900s, late 1900s, as opposed to juice. Now, juice has long been a thing, if you will, because of people like Boyce, the Boyce therapy. I keep forgetting his first name, but he put out a little book, The Cure for All Cancers, including leukemia. And he had helped himself, healed his stomach cancer, and then healed many other people by putting them on a 6-week juice diet. And at the time, we didn't have juicers or blenders, which is one of the reasons, this all only recently developed. But they had to grate the vegetables, and it was mostly vegetables, mostly roots, actually, carrots and beets and radish root, and then there was apple in it. I forget, there was only 5 or 6 ingredients and you couldn't play much with them. And I also believe that, or I think that he used those root vegetables because at the time in the late 1800s, when he started doing this and throughout the early 1900s, other vegetables could not be kept, right? You stored your root vegetables in the basement, often in earth bins or sand bins with sand, so that they would stay fresh and juicy throughout the winter time in the northern hemisphere, right? Or in the northern part of the northern hemisphere or the southern part of the southern hemisphere. So where the weather is cold and you can't grow fresh fruits and vegetables in the summer. So this juice diet that he invented could be done any time of the year because those roots were always available in the European setting. I think he was Swiss originally. And so he realized that you could reverse cancer and heal a person altogether from cancer with this 6-week juice diet. And he added some teas if you also had liver or kidney issues, because those issues needed to be healed. So he also added some herbal tea remedies that would help and ease the healing. Yeah, so that was the invention of juicing. But like I said, these vegetables had to be grated and then squeezed by hand or in some kind of pressure machine or manually, right, in a cloth to get the juice out. Can you imagine what kind of work that entails to get, to get half a gallon of juice out of vegetables that way? So that is also why it wasn't. Other people like Birker, also a Swiss doctor, invented a raw food diet at pretty much at the same time or even a little earlier, and realized that it didn't just help rich people lose weight, because at the time only the rich were fat or stocky, but it healed their high blood pressure and their heart issues and their liver issues, and it healed everything, this raw food thing that he started. So that's why we have Birker muesli, and some of you may know still today. That's the guy who started that. But the smoothies required a blender, something that chopped vegetables so small in a watery environment that they would turn into this smooth consistency, right? So smoothies required the invention of a blender that could sit in your kitchen and do this work for you, and you didn't have to sit there and squeeze something out of a mash that you had grated. Um, that's a little bit of that history. And then the first person who sort of became worldwide known for doing green smoothies, meaning putting green cruciferous, again, vegetables into this blender thing, was Victoria Butenko, who was 400 pounds or even more. Her husband had thyroid failure, and her son was type 1 diabetic, and her daughter had severe acne and other issues. So she went on this tour, and they had immigrated into the US from Russia I think before the kids were born. So they had indulged in the American diet, when they got here. What a fabulous, what a fabulous diet. And this is what happened to them. Now, mainly when her 8-year-old son and the 9-year-old fainted or collapsed on the kitchen floor. There's another word in the medical, when that happens for diabetics, right? So when you conk out. So this child was on the kitchen floor out with diabetic insulin rush or failure to balance the insulin, right? When that happened for the second time, she decided, I really, really need to find something to fix this child's issues, because I don't want my child to die, right? So she went on this library research. At the time, there were no computers, there were no cell phones. And one day she finds a lady at a bank who looks like she's old but really fit. And she asks the lady, what do you do to stay so fit? And the lady tells her, for 20 years now, I eat raw food. And she's very taken aback, but the lady allows her to communicate with her and visit her, and she learns and then gets some books. There have been other people who've discovered that raw food heals. And overnight, Victoria puts all her fridge and pantry ingredients into big bags and takes them to the church food pantry and buys a case of bananas. So the next day, the whole family had nothing but bananas. and everybody was complaining and they thought they were going to be starving. But the day after a day of only bananas, the headaches were gone. They slept better. The child wasn't falling over. And it kicked in, and nobody was hungry. They just stuffed their faces with those bananas. And then, of course, they expanded the palette of available foods in the house. But it's a fascinating story how that got done. Well, if you look up Victoria Butenko now, unfortunately, when her husband divorced her, this is 20 years later, they all get healed of all their issues. Raw Family, I think, is their most famous book. And the two kids also wrote a really good book with lots of recipes and things, Sergei and Valya Butenko. Look them up. So unfortunately, when her husband left her, she fell back into eating and becoming pretty big again. So she still then invented a blender that was less expensive than a Vitamix, which is what most of us use that are serious about raw foods, which or the Blend Tech is also very good. But these are very strong and very expensive blenders. And some people feel, they really can't afford that. Now, of course, we have lots of blenders. We have the Ninjas, and I hear they have gotten better, just not as powerful for many things. But yeah, so that when she then learns that greens are very powerful and they eat these huge salads, and she wants to figure out how to get more greens into her body, she tries to stuff kale into the blender and blends it up and tastes it, and it tastes horrible. She's like, I can't do this. But then she throws in 3 bananas and I think pineapple or something at the time. And whoa, suddenly it just tastes fresh. And that's what she then went with, a blender full of greens and then bananas and other fruits on top. And suddenly it becomes very palatable. And then she went around the world teaching this. And of course, I met her at the time in Ithaca. And yeah, that's how I learned too about green smoothies and their powerful effect. So in the meantime, thousands and thousands of people have reversed all kinds of diseases going on a smoothie and then high raw diet, as we call that. So that's the quick history. Now, if you really want to change your whole lifestyle, I recommend to work with me on a longer track, which is the Super Happy Body program, either privately or in a small group, where we go through changing your lifestyle and your outlook on life, often also your career. Some people have changed their career, have either become certified coaches with me or have started other businesses that then allow them to be more of who you really feel you are, which is the ultimate goal also of a healthier diet and a healthier body. You can be more of who you really are. You're not constantly hampered and impeded upon by these illnesses. We now have, the numbers are just outrageous. We now have over 50% cancer rate. So that means that every other person will get cancer at some time in their life or multiple times, and some will survive multiple times, but it just is not your full self. Then there is the diabetes rate, then there is the overweight rate, then there is, they're all like above 50%. It's insane. I just looked at diabetes. 50% of Americans are either pre-diabetic or diabetic and get medicated for those issues. So just imagine, right? 30% of children have um, chronic diseases and medications, and it just goes on and on and on. So if that's not where you want to end up being, do something about it. And there's so many of us who help people change that lifestyle in a fun way, so that it's tasty. My subtitle, even on my raw food product line when I had a factory, was always, delicious, or I only do delicious. It's very important that we enjoy our food, that we enjoy our body, that we enjoy nature, that we enjoy the sunshine. Right now, the sun is beaming into my house. And by the way, I'm sitting in my new house, which is still very empty. That's why there are no paintings on the walls behind me like you may be used to. And I have not really moved in. So I just set this up so that I could have this conference. The kitchen is functioning, obviously, because I need my machines to function, but I have not moved in. My things, my furnishings are still in storage. So I forgot to say that in the beginning. I'm sitting in this bare environment because I have not moved in. My piano is going to be sitting where I'm looking at, and it's not there. And I'm slowly figuring out what goes where in this little house. So yeah, that too, we need to arrange. How do we want to live? What do we want our environment to be? If I showed you the floors here, they are, let me see if we can see that they are hardwood flooring. But that beautiful red oak was covered up with laminate. And if you read up the emissions, the what it's made of and how it's made, and the emissions of laminate, you find very peculiar, a ingredient in there that has long been known to be a pretty bad idea to inhale every day, and that's formaldehyde. So, you know, that's what we do to ourselves. And it can't always be changed. Sometimes we have to deal with what we get. But yeah, so that was a whole other operation here, just to create an environment that is more to is more welcoming to the biology of my body, as we are, of course, all aging and we don't live forever. And I just want the time that I am here to be as enjoyable and as productive as possible, because for most of us, we get most of our joy out of being meaningfully engaged and providing others with, how do I call it? How do I say it? Doing something that renders others grateful and happy about our existence in their life. So, rendering others happy, it's the old Ubuntu concept, the African concept of I am, therefore, no, you are, therefore I am because you are. There's many interpretations of that one word, Ubuntu, which expresses that. We want to be recognized by others and loved by others. And we experience ourselves only because others reflect us and we reflect ourselves in others. So that's the lifestyle. And the little smoothies feast is just a taste into a life that could be a lot more glorious. All right, I'm going to leave it there. And am taking, oh, look at that. How do I always do that? It's 56 minutes into the hour. So, but we can go a little overboard if you have questions. Hillary and Ed, who are here, do you have any questions? Ed, you've heard this many times, I think, right? The whole story. And you have to unmute yourself if you do want to say something. Hillary, you're unmuted.
I was really happy to hear that we can have ground up millet because I didn't know you could eat millet raw. Do you sprout it first or just grind up the grain?
You can do either. You see,
okay.
because when we grind up grain, my research and understanding has shown we grind it up in the blender. We don't get down to the level of breaking down the cell wall. So the tissue, if you will, of that grain is still alive and still absorbs water, right? But we do kill it as soon as we heat it. You will see that sometimes in the past, I have gotten sunflower seeds that are described as raw in the store, but you want to soak them to see them sprout, and they don't, and they pasteurize. So that doesn't work. So it has to be really raw grain, but typically organic millet is not pasteurized because, I don't know why, but it's not. So that I always, and if you sprout it, it's really cute. Because they're these tiny grains and they grow these tiny little sprouts, I don't know, these things thrill me sometimes. Like you can put the grain in a strainer and hang the strainer above a bowl of water so that it doesn't touch, but it just absorbs the humidity from the water. And then out of the strainer, these little tiny little roots come out.
That is cute.
Yeah.
And other grains that work or don't work, just so we know which ones we can use. Can we use amaranth? Does that work?
Yes, absolutely. Amaranth. I have not sprouted amaranth, but friends of mine have. Amaranth and buckwheat. And buckwheat on its own can taste really yucky when it's raw. But if you sprout it just a little bit or mix it in with other things, I have a couple of things that I make with buckwheat. It's very nutritious. I don't have the spectrum of nutrients in front of me, but hemp seed is another really good item. Of course, hemp seed, it's always praised for its high protein value. But like I said, there's enough protein in everything for us. What other seeds can you think of that I'm not bringing up to mind right now? I mean, people even sprout rice, but it stays pretty hard.
There is teff and sorghum and quinoa.
Yeah, quinoa is a little too bitter for my liking, but definitely, of course, also good. I have no experience with teff other than eating it in Ethiopian restaurants. And what was the last one?
Sorghum.
Sorghum, I also have no experience. Do you?
I've only had it cooked so far. It's kind of like oatmeal, but it's good in winter because it's even more hearty. It's like really a hearty grain.
And you can, of course, sprout all the regular grains, the organic wheat, barley, rye, and what's the fourth one? There are 4 main grains that I use. I can't think of it. No, rice is the Asian version of eating grain. The European or Central or Russian central grains are the wheat, the barley, the rye. As soon as I close this Zoom call, I will be thinking of the 4th one. But yeah, all of those can be sprouted as well. The wheat has the disadvantage, unless you get an old form of wheat called spelt or kamut, these have been so mutated, not mutilated, but mutated over time. They're so hibernized, right? That they contain less nutrients than they should, even when
Right.
organic. Mm-hmm.
I've heard that einkorn is good too.
Einkorn, isn't einkorn also a wheat version?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's another one that's supposedly okay.
that's older. Yes, and that is not as gluten
Yeah.
laden. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. I didn't even know that that name exists. I only know it from Europe. You know, einkorn. It's a very German word. Um, yeah, all those grains can be, but you can also just soak them so that they absorb a little bit of water. And I call it, awaken the seed. When you, like, for example, when I soak my sunflower seeds, you can tell that they're awakened because they have absorbed all the water. You just put the seeds in a bowl, cover it just barely with water, right? And within an hour, they will have drunk up that water, or most of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. So then you know that the seed is awakened and has an easier digestible quality than when it's dry. But in some recipes, some of my recipes, I want that thickening effect that you can have with a dry grain ground down that then absorbs all the liquid in the mixture and creates like a pudding or a thicker mass.
Right. Yes. That
So
makes sense.
that's why I sometimes don't soak, but also it's time. It's very time consuming to plan all these things in advance and soak and sprout and da.
Right.
Some people sprout buckwheat and then dehydrate it again and then grind it. Okay, if you have the time, good. But I don't. So most of the time because I'm doing this kind of thing. Yeah, grains are beautiful because they are the seeds of life. I have nothing against grains when they're organic and raw and alive. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
You're welcome. Right, Ed, do we still have you? Yeah, we have you, but if you want to say something, unmute yourself. Because I'm happy to wrap this up. Tonight at 7, I will be describing the savory smoothie, and the actual smoothie feast begins on Thursday and will be mornings at 9 a.m. Now, for people who have to be at work, there will be a recording that will be open for 24 hours or 48 hours or whichever comes first. And you'll be able to access that day's smoothie experience and people's comments and results. That's the plan. That's how we're going to do it. And then we'll see how far people get with their feeling better. So much about is about feeling, right? Because of course our body inhibits often the happy feelings when it's achy and painful and or limiting our abilities to live to the fullest. Let's all live to the fullest. All right. That's it for this morning's introduction to the Smoothie Feast. 7-day Smoothie Feast starts on Thursday, the 24th of October. We're still in October. So 10/24/24 is the date. October 24th in 1924. Ciao, everybody. It's been a pleasure. I shall see you soon. Bye.